Okay, we are just going to continue talking about the ways that governments respond to issues and how, liberalism can be impacted by that. And when we talk about liberalism, particularly, we're talking about, let's say, people's rights. How are people's rights impacted during times of crisis, whether that's environment or conflict, some sort of issue, right? So the October crisis relates to, this is a particular time period in Canadian history, like in the 70s, the FLQ, which is the Front de Liberation du Quebec, right? So this is a kind of borderline political terrorist group in Quebec. They support this idea of Quebec's sovereignty. They don't want to say things that I don't fully recall, but I'm quite sure they were separatists, right? They're very against the idea of Canada. They don't support it, and they are pushing and promoting their means through violence, right? So they kidnap, they abduct this guy, James Cross and Pierre Laporte, okay? And one guy is from England, that's James Cross. Pierre Laporte is a Quebec cabinet minister, so they are kidnapping high-profile political officials, right? They're not just kidnapping their child or whatever, which is still a terrible thing to do. The Quebec cabinet minister ended up dead through this process, so there's like a photo there. Quebec Deputy Premier Pierre Laporte's assassination by the FLQ ushered in martial law across all of Canada. Martial law could be viewed very similarly as, similar to something like the War Measures Act. Martial law is when, for the security of everyone, the government makes a decision to maybe instill curfew, they're limiting and restricting your freedom of movement. Maybe they're setting up check stops and they're checking everyone, right? Like, you have a right not to be searched and seized for no reason. Like, the police, if they ever pull you over, they're not just allowed to look through your vehicle, right? Now, if if an officer says, hey, can I look at your phone, and you open it up and hand it to them, you've now given them the right to look at that. Now, obviously, if you just say no, that's not necessarily gonna free up your situation, but during martial law, maybe the police have added ability to look through your car, your vehicle, for whatever concern they have. In this situation, they're looking for this Quebec minister. In the above picture, Laporte's body is discovered strangled ritualistically with a cross on a chain. So, a lot of religious connotations there. They're not showing the body. Okay, this is one of the, I believe this was the third time the War Measures Act was enacted, which ironically was enacted by our current Prime Minister Trudeau's dad, Pierre Trudeau. Okay. Civil liberties were suspended. We already chatted about that, and the FLQ was formally outlawed. Anyone attending an FLQ meeting or speaking favorably of the organization was presumed to be a member. So again, they're restricting your freedom of speech. They're restricting your freedom of association and assembly, potentially, because this group is committing terrorist acts, right? And so it's important to ask yourselves, if there's a political group or an environmental group or just any type of group, and they're being persecuted for whatever reason, are you allowed to remove everyone else's ability to, let's say, weigh in on the conversation, either in support or against what these groups are up to? I just noticed, was there always 3 desks in this row? Okay. Some student was asking if the room got changed around. I thought it's a desk room. Okay. So again, governments have to at times make very complicated decisions, right? If you have a foreign minister and a domestic cabinet minister who have been kidnapped, abducted by an organization that's making demands of the government, what should the government do? Think about it this way. Like, if you were kidnapped, what should your parents be allowed to do to the people who kidnapped you? Anybody seen the movie Prisoners? It's a really good movie. It explores this topic to an extent. What's up?
It's messed up on the classroom, the version of the notes.
Yeah, sometimes the notes when they go onto Google Classroom get a little funky, so just make sure you're following along with the board as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, do you think, let's say you get kidnapped and your parents are trying to find the person who kidnapped you, the police aren't able to find that, and the one person that they suspect, the police let go, right? Because you're not allowed to just detain someone until you find enough evidence. That could take months or years. So you can't say, hey, we suspect you, so we're just going to keep you in detainment. Should your parents be allowed to take the law into their own hands? Maybe beat this person up, question them, interrogate them? You're saying yes. Okay, so they could just put your hand on a table with the hammer and say, where's my child? Right? So what if they're wrong? Like, what if this person was innocent? Then what? What should happen to your parents? You go to jail, right? Assaulting a person with a weapon. Okay. Similarly, then, if it's at a group level, like let's say your friend is a part of a group and they start doing some terrible things, can you say, hey, well, I know a member of this group and, he's pretty okay. All of a sudden now the government says, oh, so you support that group. Well, now you're in trouble as well. You must be a member as well. Like, are you free to speak freely, right? And that's kind of the main issue there in regards to the chapter. Anytime a government takes away the rights of its citizens, that's going to invoke a lot of, what is the word used, controversy. There's going to be a lot of talk of, hey, should the government have done this? Is this an overreach of their power? Was this too much? Should the government have done anything differently? So the War Measures Act was invoked during the Freedom Convoy protest, particularly on the people protesting in Ottawa. A lot of those people, you can watch the videos online. They have barbecues going, they have bouncy castles, they're making simple, many of them simply said, hey, we want to talk with the government about what you're doing, about how it impacts us. And a lot of these people are truckers, so they're heavily impacted by some of the restrictions. Particularly, the Freedom Convoy movement started when they started restricting more so the movement between the borders, right? So if you were unvaccinated, you couldn't go across the border. Obviously, there was a lot of restrictions placed on people who are unvaccinated throughout the pandemic, but when it goes on for 2-3 years, when the government says that, hey, we need to have this power until this crisis is resolved, how do you resolve a health crisis? Something that might reoccur over and over again. How long are you allowed to restrict a person's rights, their freedom to move, their freedom to associate, to assemble? Imagine if we all still had to wear masks and space ourselves out, and you couldn't gather with your friends in gym class, and nobody could watch your sport games, and you couldn't go see your parents. Right? Like now, it's easy for us to look back and go, well, what I mentioned to my friend earlier this week that I wasn't feeling well, I said, I hope it's not COVID, because I've had COVID a couple of times. And she responded, she's like, COVID's over, it doesn't exist anymore, as a joke, obviously. Right? And that's the sentiment for a lot of people. They kind of turn their eyes, they block their view and say, hey, that was in the past, we don't want to think about that anymore. Right? But what do you do when the government takes away the rights of people? And most of you would have been 15 or 16 years old, so you wouldn't have been dramatically impacted, but for myself, I remained unvaccinated, still do. There was a long period where I couldn't go anywhere and I couldn't do anything because the government deemed it so. And so anytime the government pulls away and restricts the rights of a small group of people or a large group of people, there's going to be a lot of controversy. Okay, so the Emergencies Act is essentially just the War Measures Act, more or less. I don't know too much about the differences between these, and this would be the more accurate term for what the government applied during the pandemic, during those protests particularly. Okay. And part of this is just gonna happen because, well, after 1982, Canada has a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You know, there's a new set of rights given to you that, like, new in terms of it's a new document. Okay, and hopefully this act includes more safeguards to protect the rights of Canadians. So a good question to ask is, you know, what are your thoughts? You know, do you think the government was right, that it was okay for the government to freeze the bank accounts of people who potentially gave money to the Freedom Convoy? Should the government be allowed to just freeze your bank account and say you can't spend any money?
No,
Because you're saying no, how come?
because that ain't their money.
It's not theirs, right? And that's really the essence of it, you know, if you're on the side that no. But what if you're giving money to a terrorist organization?
It's still my money.
Very much an individualist, yeah. Okay. Does anyone think that the government should be allowed to
I don't think,
restrict where you spend your money?
I don't think so.
Most of us are saying no. I'm interested. Why do you think?
Well, it's so complicated, honestly. Well, but
Boys, please.
Well, here's the thing. How does the government know we are supporting the Freedom Convoy or something, or anything bad like that?
That's a good question. So how did the government know that these people were donating money? So are the banks giving them that information, or is the government forcing the banks or asking, right? So should the government be allowed to invade your privacy and see what you're up to with your money, what you're spending it on?
No, that's screwed up.
That's also screwed up, right?
No, that's
Why is it so screwed up? Some people would say, yeah, it is. What are you hiding? You as well. It's your money. What are you guys hiding?
Don't concern me, bro.
Perler money.
Concerned you. What did you say?
Perler beads money.
I don't know what that is. Okay. Right, so some people vary, right? Some people think that, well, hey, I like feeling safe, and therefore, yeah, the government should be able to stop you from spending your money to support a potentially terrorist organization. Like, some people really thought that the Freedom Convoy, and you know, there was a wide range of protesters in this movement, but let's say the people in Ottawa, some people thought, hey, they're holding the government hostage. Which, I mean, I don't know how you come to that conclusion, particularly if you have no weapons, right? Some people would say that to protect the safety of democracy, which I think is one of the arguments they made, and the people, that the government should be able to look into your bank account. They should be able to ask the bank, tell the bank that, hey, freeze this person's bank account. They're giving donations to movements that we don't like. You know, and this idea that, just skip ahead so you can keep filling out your notes. You know, this idea that when people go somewhere to express their concerns, let's say physically in person, that isn't democracy, that isn't democratic, is absolutely absurd. That's how people did it. Right, so let's say, I mean, did anyone here play a role in helping the dance come to be? I don't think so. I think that was,
Where's your?
yeah, Brazil and a bunch of other students. Okay, so when they take their signatures to Mr. Heck or Miss Rantucci, isn't that a form of democracy? Right, they're saying, hey, we the people have signed this document. We would like a dance. Okay. Imagine Mr. Heck and Rantucci hid in their office and look behind the glass and say, hey, we're being held hostage. Like, the people have raised their voice, right? So, you know, what is democracy? It's when everyone is allowed, more or less, allowed to speak their mind and to express their views. And I don't know, I'm assuming in this particular situation, it was probably scary for the Prime Minister that, holy cow, like, 5,000 people showed up in Ottawa, 10,000 people, whatever the number was. Democracy can be very scary when it's happening right under your nose, right in front of you. If the whole school got crammed into the office and demanded for a dance, something else, I don't know. Like, it'd be kind of scary, right? So there is this potential connection from democracy that can easily become mob rule, right? That's what you see in the French Revolution. All of a sudden, you just have the population showing up to the king's palace. They essentially drag him and his wife out, right? And then eventually the French Revolution goes as it does. They cut off both their heads. They cut off a lot of people's heads. I think around 40,000 people or something like that got their heads cut off in that period. 10,000 maybe, 10 to 40,000, right? So large groups of people can get violent, but they're probably definitely going to get violent if you choose to not listen to them and avoid them, which is what more or less what King Louis did to an extent. I'm jumping over that briefly. Okay, and so when the government instills the Emergencies Act or the War Measures Act, sometimes it's not always obvious, like how long are we going to use this act for, right? So I want to say, I don't know how quickly people started leaving after the Emergencies Act was put in place, like in Ottawa. I don't know how quickly some of those truck drivers started leaving, but are people allowed to protest peacefully, right? So if you take your truck and park it in Ottawa, are you allowed to just park it there in public parking as a form of protest? Is the government allowed to threaten and say, hey, we'll remove your commercial driver license? Some people were threatened. They said, clearly you're incapable of taking your children. Clearly you're incapable of taking care of your children. So we'll get child services out here and we'll have them removed from your, I don't know what word you want to use, possession, ownership, your care? Custody, right? Thank you. It's a great word, right? So many people who are protesting, let's say peacefully, they were threatened for their livelihood and they threatened their family. Is the government allowed to do that? Should a government in a Western democracy, in a liberal country, threaten to freeze bank accounts, to, rip apart families using the child protection services, to threaten people's livelihoods? Like, a lot of people in Europe clowned on Trudeau for that. When he spoke up to other countries about saying, hey, you need to check your democratic rights here. Some people, they fired right back at him. They're like, you're the guy who froze bank accounts and threatened all these peaceful protesters. Like, why are you telling us to do anything? Right? It's quite funny when that happened. Right? So when is the government allowed to remove your rights, and for how long, if they're allowed to? The Patriot Act is something that came in place after 9/11. And this idea that people trade freedom for security. I forget whose quote it was, but the quote goes that when you trade freedom for security, you usually end up getting neither. That might have been one of the founding fathers. It might have been someone in America's history who said that. And it's tricky because the Patriot Act allowed a lot of, if I recall correctly, so it stands for providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. Patriot. Okay, so what are appropriate tools? Is the government allowed to just spy on your emails, your bank statements, your cell phone calls? Let's say, I'm sure we all have to some extent this belief, like, how many of you believe your phone is listening to you all the time? Right? Okay, so let's say is the government allowed to just pick up on those speakers and just hear whatever's going on? Just listen to Mr. Kawaja, brainwashing the youth. And it'll drag me away to jail. Okay, so what tools are those required to intercept and obstruct terrorism? So does that mean that they're watching you all the time, or listening to you all the time, or monitoring you? Like, is that okay? Well, after 9/11, a lot of people thought, hell yeah. Like, we don't want to see 2 more towers fall. We don't want to see America get attacked. We don't want American civilians dying on American soil like this. So a lot of people probably felt like, yes, the government should do something, should do extreme things to make sure that this doesn't happen again. They gave up their freedom, for security to some extent.
I think it's it now, or?
This could be the last slide. I don't know. It looks like there's a couple more there.
Yeah. So continue or?
Additionally, during 9/11, there was a lot of, let's call them witch hunts or manhunts for people, anyone who's associated with any terror group or any of the wrong people, potentially their skin color. I showed my grade 9s this movie last year called The Mauritanian. It's a story about this guy who's from Mauritania, which is, if I recall correctly, a country in Africa. A couple years before 9/11, he's in Germany. He gets a phone call. He picks it up. He answers it. It's a relative saying, "Hey, I'm gonna send you a wire transfer. Can you give money to this guy who's living here?" Cool, his cousin or brother, whatever, is asking him to do him a favor. He does it. 9/11 happens. Year or two after 9/11, all of a sudden the American authorities are looking for him. They're trying to hunt him down. They're trying to actually get him out of the country because they didn't have. What is the word? They didn't have jurisdiction, but they also wouldn't. There's a legal term where some countries won't allow other countries to just take one of their citizens for legal reasons. Starts with an E, I forget. But America wasn't allowed to just go in there and take this guy out. They actually had to wait for him to leave the country. Eventually he leaves the country, they catch him. He was interrogated in Canada as well, but then he was imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay for about 12, 13 years while they were trying to find enough evidence on him. The reason why he was in prison was because that call that he got while he was in Germany a couple years before 9/11 was made from Osama, that call was sent from Osama bin Laden's satellite phone.
Oh shit.
Exactly, right? His argument was, how am I supposed to know when I pick up a phone whose phone that is? Like, I just see a number. Turns out it's my cousin. Their argument was that, well, Osama bin Laden's satellite phone doesn't just call anyone. So clearly you must be associated some way. So we're just gonna keep you in prison until we find out. A lot of their investigation was torturing this guy. Right? So a lot of people were tortured, like part of the 9/11 process. A lot of people were tortured in Guantanamo Bay, which is a prison that's not on American soil. It's actually in Cuba. So a lot of people were in prison. This guy was actually raped as well. Unfortunately, they put him under psychological torture, physical torture. They eventually got him to write a confession after torturing him nonstop for a couple days, where he confessed to everything. Some lawyer picks up this case and fights for him, and all of this is under duress, right? So he's being stressed out. He's being forced to make this. But this person spends 13, 14 years in prison while the government is trying to prove that he's actually a terrorist or a criminal, right? So what is the government allowed to do, right? Just because, obviously 9/11 was a horrible thing, right? A lot of people died. But does that mean that you're just allowed to put someone in jail and say, well, we're just gonna keep you here nice and tidy until we find out whether or not you're involved? Like, what if it took them 20 years? What if the guy still could be in prison if nobody picked up his case? But fortunately, he got out of prison maybe a couple years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago. So this idea that some of the measures taken by the Patriot Act or the War Measures Act or Emergencies Act isn't going to be equally applied to everyone, right? And that is always a concern. Okay, so the no-fly list, I think the next couple of slides kind of go into more detail, so I'll just let you take the notes and we'll chat about that. But the no-fly list is, as it suggests, people who are restricted or not allowed to fly in airplanes for security reasons. And I don't know if this no-fly list is the same as, let's say because many countries, if you commit a serious crime, you're not allowed to leave the country, right? You lose that right. So let's say if you murder someone, you spend 8 to 12 years in prison, they release you, whatever. When you come out, you're not just allowed to go and fly wherever you want. America, for sure, you can't go there, right? Same thing, in America, if you have a felony, you're not allowed to just go fly into another country, right? So it's not right now, it's not obvious to me if, you know, if you have some serious criminal conviction, that you'd be put on the no-fly list, or if the no-fly list is specifically for people who are potential threats due to their relationship with terrorist groups. Okay, so. And obviously, you know, they're making a joke here about the dog, but, you know. Ouch. I didn't know about this case before I started going through these notes, but again, another case where, despite the fact that this person has a Canadian passport, you know, that you know, Americans aren't too happy about his place of birth, which was Syria, which after Al-Qaeda's time, ISIS came to be, which one of the main areas they operated in was Syria. Additionally, when I traveled around the world, when I was flying home, I was connecting through America. They were quite curious as to why I went to Israel. This was in 2017, so this would have been at the height of ISIS as well. So I think they also had their concerns that maybe this guy like skipped town and, you know, fought the holy war. Let me tell you, the people in Israel were very concerned I was going to do that. They questioned me for a solid 1 hour. This guy was yelling at me for like 20-30 minutes. Which essentially just built up into him yelling at me, "Are you gonna go to Syria?" Me being an idiot, 21 at the time, it's 2017, I'm looking at this guy like, why the hell would I wanna go to Syria? Look at my skin color, man, they'll cut my head off. Right, but because my passport says I'm born in Pakistan, this guy's like, oh man, this Pakistani guy's coming here, he's trying to find his easy way to ISIS. I could have been a case. I could have been this guy. They just deport me to Pakistan. God, that'd be terrible. Let's see, how many other slides do we have left?
Let's wrap it up.
Oh, we'll wrap it up soon, don't worry. We'll finish this PowerPoint. I think this is the last section here. This, you know, the Anti-Terrorism Act is just extending what the government's legal rights are against you if you're potentially a threat. So, if I understand correctly right now, your current legal right to not be held in prison, not to be held under suspect, I believe past 24 hours it's unreasonable. I don't fully recall. But you definitely, they can't keep you in a prison cell for 3 days. Like, it goes against your rights. So if that does happen to you, you can have that court case thrown out because it's unreasonable. Now, under the Anti-Terrorism Act, you know, they're allowed to keep you a little bit longer, right? So it just extends their ability to, what do I want to say? Not hold you hostage, but essentially hold you hostage. Okay. We'll just skip on over this stuff. I feel like we're just beating a dead horse at this point. Okay, the second sentence here, it operates on the assumption that a person is guilty and the due course of process to individual freedoms is overruled by the need for security. So again, your legal rights in Canada do strictly state that you are innocent until proven guilty. There has to be due process. The government isn't allowed to just hold you, or the police aren't just allowed to hold you for like 2 weeks while they figure out whether or not you're the right person, like you're the suspect, the bad guy, whatever you want to call it. That goes against your rights. And there we go. That's that. Thank you.